I think I recognize just about everyone, but just in case, my name is Henry Underwood. I'm a GIS specialist and planner at Southwest Region Planning Commission. And one of the things we do is to provide some staff support to this group, the Monadnock Broadband Group, which, as you know, is an informal coalition, including municipal staff, planners like ourselves, practitioners, internet service providers, legislators, and others, that have met to learn about and work on broadband related issues in our region. So thanks for joining in today. I think I'd like to, since we have a pretty small group online, I'd like to just do a quick round of introductions. So I'll kind of just call on you based on the order in my attendee list. Clay, could you say a brief hello?
Hello, can you hear me okay? Good.
Loud and clear.
So I'm Clay Purvis with the Department of Commerce, National Telecommunications and Information Administration, and I am the new Federal Program Officer for both Vermont and New Hampshire. I live in Vermont, so I'm not far away, and I'll be working very closely with the state broadband offices in both states. So in your state, that's the Office of Broadband Initiatives and Matt Conserva to get these programs up and running and get broadband out to everyone. Do you want me to, and I apologize, I wanted to be there in person with all of you today, but I went to a conference and training last week, which turned out to be a super spreader event. So I am COVID positive and stuck in my house. But if you want, I can start going through the presentation. Or are we going around still?
Yeah, let's stick to introductions for now.
Okay, great.
I'm going to have a little bit of time before we'll talk more about the BEAD program, etc. Tom, could you say hello?
Hello. I'm Tom Bascom. I'm with the town of Greenfield. We've done a broadband implementation in the last year. It's been pretty successful. So that's kind of our story.
Thanks, Tom.
I don't know how much more you want me to say.
That's good for now. Matt Conserva.
Good morning. How are you guys doing?
Well, thanks.
You guys hear me all right? Yeah? Good. My name is Matt Conserva. I'm the new broadband program manager. I'm trying to continue the work that Mark and I started. And Mark is not too far away from me, which is very nice. But I look forward to working with you guys, continuing our relationship.
Thanks, Matt. Carol Miller.
Good morning, all. Carol Miller from the National Collaborative for Digital Equity and a contractor with the New Hampshire Broadband Mapping Initiative at the University of New Hampshire at NH Granite. Good morning, all.
Good morning, Carol. Dale Cunningham, I believe.
Hi, I'm Dale Cunningham. I'm with the town of Croydon, trying to get broadband into our town. We've been working on it way too long.
Great to have you. David Justice, or DJ.
Hello, David Justice. I'm the project director at NH Granite and UNH in Durham, and also the PI on the Broadband Mapping Initiative.
Thanks, DJ. Aaron Cotton from Representative Custer's office. Thanks for coming.
Of course, thanks for having me. I'm Erin from Congressman Custer's office, and I handle our housing and broadband portfolio. Thanks.
Jeff McIver.
Good morning, everyone. Jeff McIver, I work for Consolidated Communications, fiber expansion manager. A lot of familiar faces on this call, and happy to be here this morning.
Thanks for taking the time, Jeff. Catch up with my list is changing here. Richard Smeeth, I think, is next. Richard, if you can hear me, feel free to unmute yourself and say a quick hello if you'd like. All right. Scott Valcourt.
Morning, I'm Scott Valcourt. I'm an associate teaching professor of computer science in the Corey College at Northeastern University's Portland, Maine campus called the Rue Institute. And I also am a contractor working with David Justice and New Hampshire Granite on the broadband mapping project with a focus on the fiber side.
Thanks for coming, Scott. Tina Kasem.
Hi, good morning. I'm Tina Kasem. I'm with Senator Shaheen's office, and my portfolio includes broadband, but also focuses on small businesses, anything to do with them. So I'll drop my email in the chat. If anyone needs anything, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks, Tina. Thanks for coming. All right. My list has jumped around. Did I miss anyone who's on Zoom who'd like to introduce themselves?
This is Richard Smeeth. I'm sorry, I had my microphone muted. I'm from the town of New Ipswich and I represent the town for broadband.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks for coming. So I introduced myself. There's two other folks here in person. So Tim, would you like to say hello to attendees?
Thank you, Henry. Good morning, everyone. Tim Murphy, Southwest Region Planning Commission. So I work with Henry on a whole range of issues. Today, we're talking broadband. It's so good to see a lot of people in on the remote option because, well, as Henry said, there's a small number of us here in the room physically.
Thanks. And our cameraman is off duty. It's not picking up on Tim's voice. And Steve, would you like to say hello?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Steve Fortier. I'm with the Department of Business and Economic Affairs for the state of New Hampshire, helping out with rural communities. And I am the state program manager for Northern Border Regional Commission.
Thanks, Steve. I see maybe one or two others have joined via Zoom. Tammy, we're in introductions. If you'd like to say hello to everyone.
Yes, hi, hello everyone. Good morning. I'm Tammy St. Gelais, Executive Director of the New Hampshire Municipal Bond Bank. We've helped several communities at the start of this when they could bond for broadband. So we helped a lot of the communities with taxable financing through broadband. And they had very, very good rates when they went out to bid. As you can see, interest rates are rising, but we still have fantastic rates. So anyone out there that needs our help with financing, please let us know. Thanks, Henry.
Thanks, Henry. Nice to see you. Great. Well, I'll switch back to go back to our agenda. Let's see. I think I have a slide on tips, which try to mention everyone here is pretty much a Zoom veteran, but letting you know as a reminder that we record these meetings so that they're resourced to folks who can't attend. I encourage you to check your name on the participants list, make sure it's correct. While you're there, say hello via the chat and consider sharing your contact information. And during the meeting, try to keep your microphone muted so that everyone can have a good experience. And I don't see folks attending by phone, so that last bullet is not necessary. And great. So a quick recap of the last meeting, which was last year. We had two of the featured presenters and topics were included the Federal Communications Commission, and we were had Chantal Vergile from their Consumer Education and Outreach talk about the Affordable Connectivity Program. And you are not seeing them here, but there's some education outreach materials here that are printed out. And after the meeting, I'll include those in the meeting info in case you haven't had a look at those. One thing we talked about was all of the promotional materials that were available for municipal governments, social service agencies, really anyone who wants to promote participation in that program. And both Matthew Conserva and Mark LaLiberty attended to talk about the state's broadband office activities. We have a bunch planned for today that you can see on the slide in front of you. I'm going to spend just a couple minutes talking about some digital literacy and access work that our agency was able to work on. And then I'll turn it over to some of our guests to talk about NTIA's BEAD program, work UNH is doing, and work the broadband office is working on and preparing to do. And towards the end, we'll have time to hear just any miscellaneous updates you'd like to share. Okay, so the first update I want to share is that SWRPC recently completed work on a digital literacy and access needs assessment. And this was published late in the fall of last year. You may have seen it on our website. And the work was sponsored by the Monadnock United Way and the Keene Senior Center. We were asked to look at digital literacy issues, especially with respect to our older adult population, and investigate what best practices could be used by healthcare providers, social service agencies, libraries, and others to address digital literacy needs. And we reported on kind of our current level of access to broadband and a number of other things. I just wanted to do a quick, this is more of an informational item to let you know to take some time later to check it out. You can find the full report on our website at swrpc.org/digital. We feel that it sits kind of in a chain of some other broadband work we've done over the years, starting with our region's first broadband plan, something that was supported by the University of New Hampshire. Our broadband implementation guide, which helps a number of communities work through the broadband infrastructure bond process and do outreach. So this is kind of shifting gears a bit from access and infrastructure to more the individual skills and issues. And I think it warrants a little bit more introduction since we have focused on infrastructure for the most part. And you'll hear terms such as equity when it comes to broadband. What does that mean? And a definition we used for this report was one from the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. They talk about digital equity in terms of 4 kind of key things: the access piece, the infrastructure, but also individual, skills, digital literacy, how people are using technology and devices to access resources on the internet, and then how access and improving digital literacy is built into the other things we're doing as a region, as a community, in workforce training and offering services online. So this report focused on kind of the first 2 parts of equity: access and digital literacy. And what you can read about and learn about in the needs assessment include things like best practices for organizations and really individuals to increase their digital skills, whether it's using a device or finding services, accessing information online. We looked at our community level, broadband access, what communities have higher and lower rates based on subscriptions to broadband, access to devices. We also had outreach components where we learned about the skill level of older adults in using the internet and devices, as well as a number of organizations. And finally, we listed kind of where we felt the gaps were based on that work, and some strategies that primarily the Keene Senior Center and other social service agencies are pursuing, the funders of the report. But really, this is a resource to everyone in the region. And they're first looking at trying to promote affordable access to broadband through the ACP Affordable Connectivity Program, and also for potentially partnering with our region's libraries more on training programming. So I encourage you to check that out offline. I'll follow up by posting a link when I get a minute. But the URL is swrpc.org/digital. Great. Well, our next agenda item, it has to do with federal level work related to broadband. It was long ago that we heard about the bipartisan infrastructure law and what was planned for broadband. Since then, we know that much of the broadband funding in that law is going to flow through the NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. So it's a good time to hear more about what some of those programs are, the timeline, and we're lucky to be joined by Clay Purvis, who introduced himself earlier. And Clay, I'd just like to turn it back to you to give any more introduction, and I'll stop sharing my screen so you can take over.
He's muted.
Clay, you're still muted. We remember when you said you were under the weather from the super spreader.
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you, and happy to be here. It's very good to meet all of you. And thank you for the introduction, Henry. As I mentioned before, I am the newly appointed federal program officer for Vermont and New Hampshire with the broadband grant programs that are coming through the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. I have a presentation today, so I'll go into detail about exactly what we're expected to receive and how these grants are going to proceed. But I'm happy to be here. As I mentioned, I live in Vermont. I have for the past 10 years worked at the Vermont Department of Public Service. I ran the telecom division. So regulating telephone service, we were the broadband office for many years back when we had no money and no authority to do anything. So I'm fairly experienced with the issues. I've now live in Essex, Vermont, which is just outside of Burlington, but for many years I also lived in the Upper Valley, and I'm familiar with the kind of western side of New Hampshire. And I even briefly worked for the Grafton County Attorney's Office a long time ago. So as an intern, so I have a little bit of experience in New Hampshire. I love both states a lot, and I'm happy to serve them. And my role as FPO, I'll be working very closely with each state broadband office on these grant programs. And that's everything from grant administration, but also encompasses stakeholder engagement and outreach, talking about the programs and what we're doing. So coming to events like this, if any of you ever have questions about the programs, feel free to reach out to me. I did put my contact in the chat, and the materials that Henry can send you after the meeting will also have my contact information. So feel free to reach out at any point. When I say I'll be working closely with the broadband offices, that really looks like talking to them every day or every other day. So if I'm not talking to Matt in New Hampshire, it's probably because I'm talking to Christine Halquist in Vermont. So you're going to probably see a lot of me, and probably anywhere you see Matt, I'll be behind him. So so why don't I get started? And if you have any questions at any point, just feel free to ask. So with that, I'm going to do an awkward share screen here. I'm not used to using Zoom, so I apologize if I don't get it right away. Can everyone see that okay? I wonder if I can make it
that lets you choose the slides.
Okay, let me just, where's the presentation? I don't remember the hotkey for presentations and the
Go
bars.
to slideshow at the top,
Okay.
towards the middle of the screen.
Yeah, the Zoom bar is blocked. So apologize. You're gonna see my my screen here for a minute. You can see all the meetings that I have overdue. Okay. All right. So before I launch into this, I'll give you a little bit of background on the NTIA. Unfortunately, we don't have a slide yet on who we are at the NTIA. So we're an agency that's housed within the larger Department of Commerce. So we're in the executive branch. We're an executive branch agency, and our focus is really on telecommunications of all things. So the NTIA does a lot of different things, and broadband's just one of them. They also do a lot of work with spectrum, licensing and management, data privacy. And so there's a lot of different things that we do at the NTIA. I'm in the Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth. So our office is really dedicated to broadband expansion. Oh, sorry about that. Henry, do you know the hotkey for going back? Previous, there we go. Okay. So the goal of the infrastructure bill, when we talk about broadband, is to make sure that everybody is connected. This is internet for all. In total, there was about 65 billion appropriated. 42.5 billion goes to the BEAD program, which is what I'm going to spend most of the time talking about today. That's broadband equity, access, and deployment. And then there's 2.75 billion for digital equity planning and capacity. So that's really focused on the other things that inhibit people from getting connected. Again, we'll talk about that in a minute. Tribal broadband connectivity program. This is probably not a program that will impact New Hampshire or Vermont because there are no federally recognized tribes. But there might be some opportunity there. And then the middle mile broadband infrastructure program. This is a $1 billion funded program to fund middle mile connections. Is open up to states and privately owned broadband companies. So if a telephone company or another CLAC wanted to receive funding, apply for funding to expand their middle mile network, they could under this program. Things that are administered by other federal agencies. So those programs I just talked about are all NTIA programs. We have the Affordable Connectivity Program, which Henry just discussed. There was money that went to the USDA for broadband expansion, and those programs, I believe, are being administered right now. And then there was some money set aside for private activity bonds. So when we look at the NTIA programs, here's a deeper dive into it. My focus as an FPO is really these two programs here, BEAD and digital equity. So that's what I'm going to spend my time talking about today. This is a highlight of the digital equity program. This is the only slide I'm going to share with you on digital equity today. It's a very important program, so don't think that the number of slides signifies its importance. It is a very important program. But this is funding to provide to each state for planning, to build state capacity, and to execute on their digital equity plan. So the state will come up with a plan. They have 1 year to do that. Then there'll be appropriated money based on a formula in the law. And then they'll have 5 years to implement that, and they'll be able to receive state or federal funding to implement that plan. And so you can see the timeline down below. And right now we're in the 1 year planning phase. Types of services or programs that could be funded under digital equity, programs for digital literacy, affordability programs, workforce development type programs. It's very open-ended, so lots of states are going to do different things, and the idea here is that New Hampshire will develop a plan that's good for New Hampshire. So we'll move on to BEAD. This is a similar slide, shows you the timeline for BEAD. Again, right now we're in the planning phase. So the state will begin to write a 5-year plan. They have 270 days to write that 5-year plan. At which point they'll put together an initial proposal to implement that plan. That's due 180 days from June 30th. So it's due at the end of 2023. And once that is approved, you'll get, each state will get 20% of its funding to implement that plan. And you have 4 years to implement it once the planning phase is done. Funding will come along the way. As you probably heard, each state gets a minimum of 100 million. And then we'll get additional funding on top of that 100 million. These are some good definitions to know. We'll be talking about the eligible entities throughout our presentation. So that's a significant term. This is just the 50 states and territories. So New Hampshire is the eligible entity. These programs are run through every state's broadband office. So in New Hampshire, that's the Office of Broadband Initiatives. In Vermont, it's the Vermont Community Broadband Board. And so every state has one. They are, by and large, they are the entity that will be in charge of administering both the BEAD and digital equity grants. Subgrantees are the external entities that would apply to the state broadband office for funding under the plans. So when we talk about subgrantees, that could be an ISP or it could be a nonprofit that's administering one of the digital equity programs, or maybe it's a college that's implementing a workforce program or something of that nature. But they are receiving a subaward from the eligible entity to enact or implement a piece of one of the two plans, the digital equity plan or the BEAD plan. This is a slide about me. As the FPO, I'm going to be working very closely with each state broadband office that I cover, Vermont Community Broadband Board and the Office of Broadband Initiatives. I will be talking to them almost daily, as I mentioned. One thing I think is important to say here is that once the plans are finalized and submitted, once the initial proposal is submitted, I actually won't be reviewing New Hampshire's final plans. Other FPOs will be reviewing New Hampshire's plan, and I'll be reviewing some other state's plan. This frees us up to really be the advocate for our state. So for all intents and purposes, I'm on Team New Hampshire. I'm here to make sure that the plan is as good as it can be going into the review process. When we talk about what BEAD's going to do, big part of it is bringing broadband to underserved and unserved communities. We have those defined in the BEAD NOFO. That might be different from how state laws in various states define broadband. But for purposes of the BEAD NOFO, anyone who lacks 25.3 is unserved. So that's basically everyone on DSL, for the most part wireless. Of course, dial-up. Satellite doesn't count, so if your only option is satellite, you're unserved. Anyone who is has a connection, or their only connection available to them is less than 100 megabits per second down and 20 up, is considered underserved. So this is basically anyone who lacks cable. So if you're on Comcast network or Charter's network, you're probably counted as served for purposes of these programs. If you're on your telephone company's DSL, you're probably unserved. You might be underserved. If you have, really fast wireless, you're still probably underserved. So this is the order of priority. We're going to tackle unserved first, then the underserved, and then we're doing community anchor institutions. That's your schools, libraries, and hospitals. And beyond that, the BEAD program can then be used for affordability, workforce development, cybersecurity training, and other uses that are related to getting people connected and online. We're doing a lot in the NOFO with developing our workforce. So two kinds of workforce development I think is important to note. One is the workforce necessary to build these networks. So we know in all 50 states that the workforce, the utility workforce, is resourced to the level of business as usual. This is not business as usual. There's going to be an incredible amount of work ahead of everyone. So making sure that our ISPs, our utility contractors, anyone who's doing this work, engineers, consultants, that we're staffed up to the level that we need to be to actually roll out broadband. And then the other side of workforce development is, once we have the broadband, making sure that we have programs in place that allow people to use that broadband for general workforce development, that programs that support the tech industry and that sort of thing. Climate resiliency is a big issue here. we want to develop networks that are climate resilient. The next Hurricane Irene to blow through, we want to make sure that that our networks stay up in the air or underground, wherever they are, and that we don't have to rebuild them every time we have a natural disaster. So that's also an important component of the BEAD NOFO. This is a detailed chart of the BEAD process. So this really goes into what every step of the way is. We're in step 2 right now, the 5-year action plan. Over the summer, last spring, I should say, the NOFO was released. Every state submitted its letter of intent to participate in the program in July. And then they applied for the grant programs. Grant awards were made, and we're now in the 5-year action planning process. Every state is in there, and I'm going to actually pause here and just mention that every state is very similarly situated to New Hampshire. There's a lot of, you might hear about grant award issues that states are dealing with, and that's certainly something that we're grappling with on both sides of the river. But those are getting worked through. States are forging ahead with their 5-year plans. This summer, June 30th, the NTIA will make its initial determination of, or excuse me, final allocation of award to every state. So this, you get 100 million, every state gets 100 million. On top of that 100 million, states will be awarded an amount of money that is based on the number of underserved and unserved locations in each state. So this is a formula that is determined by statute in the NOFO. That determination will be made on June 30th. So then New Hampshire will know kind of exactly what amount of money it'll receive to be deployed in broadband. And at that point, it'll begin its initial proposal. This is a detailed proposal that will explain to the NTIA how it plans to spend its broadband money. The initial proposal will be required to show that at the end of this program, New Hampshire will have universal access to broadband. Once the NTIA approves that, the NTIA will release 20% of the funding. Once New Hampshire gets the 20%, it can begin implementing the programs. It also needs to come up with a final proposal. There should be no surprises between the two. This is going to be very consistent with what was in the 5-year plan, what was in the initial proposal. It's going to be tweaking at this point. But then that's due 12 months after approval of the initial proposal. And then you have 4 years to implement the program. That's where the eligible entity will provide grants to sub-grantees, say ISPs or communities to build broadband, or like I mentioned, others sub-awardees to implement other types of programs under BEAD. This is a slide on the funding formula. As I mentioned, you get every state will receive 100 million as the small state minimum, and then there's a formula that is determined based on the number of unserved and underserved locations in each state. here is a list of items, and I'm going to kind of go through this quickly because I know we're running out of time, of items that will need to be included in the initial proposal. I think we've discussed many of them, but if you have any questions at the end, you can let me know. One key aspect of the BEAD NOFO is in this sub-grantee process, it contemplates a competitive subawards process, which includes allowing everyone to participate. So whether you're a private ISP, a municipal ISP, cooperative, all types of ISPs are allowed to participate, and all technologies will be allowed to participate. So there's no exclusion of an entity based on technology or a type of business, so long as they can meet the minimum speed requirements. That said, the BEAD NOFO does favor fiber. So you can do universal service with fiber. That is the preferred way to go. The weighting process will favor fiber over technologies that max out at a lower speed. Matching is a big part of this. At a minimum, every project requires a 25% match. The BEAD NOFO does encourage a higher match. There's some latitude about what kind of matches are allowed, and in certain circumstances, in-kind matches are allowed. ARPA is also allowable, though there are the rules do discuss ARPA specifically, so it's worth taking a look at the NOFO about that. There will be high cost areas. The NTIA will designate some areas to be high cost or extreme high cost, and in those cases there are opportunities for match waivers depending on what the cost of service per unit will end up being. Again, I think this slide we've probably covered already. One important part of the BEAD NOFO that I haven't covered yet is the challenge process. So you've probably heard a lot about the mapping challenge process that the FCC is undergoing. There's a separate challenge process that each state broadband office will also have to undertake once it gets its initial proposal approved. The state broadband office will have to develop a process where stakeholders can challenge the service availability at each particular location, and that can be both ISPs and also residents or anyone else who wants to challenge the determination of service at a particular address. The state broadband offices will have latitude to define and develop this challenge how they wish, of course, with rules in place to guide them. But be on the lookout for that. It's going to be a very important component of the BEAD program. There will be gating requirements that ISPs will have to meet before they're allowed to participate in the subaward process. These really speak to financial and managerial capability. Basically, can they do the project? Are they credit worthy? Do they have the funding to pull this off? But that'll also be an important piece of the program And if you are an ISP or you're talking to ISPs during the course of this program, it's always good to keep these gating requirements in mind. Again, I think we've covered most of this, but happy to take questions if you're interested. Oh, I wanted to go back on that one. Another piece of the subaward process will be affordability, and there will have to be low-cost options available to eligible subscribers through that program. Again, there's a lot of ways that this could be defined within the guidelines of the NOFO, but that will be a piece of it. Certainly, we want to make sure that everyone is able to access the broadband networks that are coming down their street. So if the broadband's $150 a month, that's not affordable to everyone. There needs to be a package that is within reach of all income levels. I think I'm going to pass by this as well. The final proposal, again, 12 months after approval of the initial proposal. At this point, this is kind of a sleeper filing at this point, because everyone really knows where this thing is going and should be busy putting it into play. So this is the kind of final chance for the broadband office and its stakeholder group to kind of put the final touches on the initial proposal. And that's my presentation. I have my contact information here. Henry's agreed to send this out to the group afterwards. He'll also send out, I have 2 one-pagers on the on each program too, that kind of condenses all of this information into one. So that might be helpful to you, and happy to take any questions. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Information, but we do, and we want to get any burning questions in before we move on. Just before that, I want to remind folks that you will see the presentation slides on the Monadnock Broadband Group page, with the meeting recording and other info from this meeting. Clay, if you could share your contact info in the chat again, that would be great. And the last thing I'll say is, if you write to Clay, consider copying me, because there may be frequent questions that come up. I'd love to be in the loop. If you think of it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Henry. And also, feel free to copy Matt too. Chances are, if you have a question that's New Hampshire specific, my first stop is going to be with OBI. So be in touch with Matt. On all things broadband, and be in touch with me as well. This is going to be a team effort. This is unlike any infrastructure project I think the federal government has ever done before. So this is really, for each state, it's really an opportunity to design and implement this in a way that is good for that state.
So our first question, we have a hand up in person here, and Molly Miller joined us in progress. Molly, this should pick up on you, but go ahead with your question.
I have 2 questions about the FCC mapping. The first is, when do they think that's going to be finished, and usable by the states? And the second one is, I'm Hancock, New Hampshire, small town, like 1,200, 1,400 people. We spent $13,500 of ARPA money to hire a group out of New Jersey, and they went, you know, they did an address by address, line by line evaluation of each households, whether they were served, unserved, what they had. Would that study that we had done like 11 months ago, would that trump the FCC? Because my understanding of the FCC is they're still looking for input in terms of whether it's accurate or not.
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to that. One thing I do want to clarify is that the FCC is a separate agency and they're not an executive branch agency. So their process is independent of ours. However, we will be using the broadband map for allocation of funding on June 30th. They are still working through data. So if my timeline is correct, they published the fabric last summer, late spring, early summer. The fabric is they hired a contractor to develop a database of every broadband serviceable building or location in the United States. So this is your house, my house, Henry's house, everybody's house. And then broadband providers were required to report broadband availability at various speed thresholds on that map. And so they did that over the summer. It was published this fall, and states were and the general public were invited to submit challenges to those assertions of broadband availability. The FCC has said that any challenge made on or before January 13th of this year will be included in the map that the NTIA will use to make its funding determination. So there was a big push kind of over Christmas, unfortunately it was over Christmas, to get as many of those challenges in as possible. This map is iterative. That means it will continue to be updated and changed throughout time. It is a live document, so to speak. So, you know, every 6 months, they're going to collect new data and publish a new set of statistics based on that data. So you can continue to update that map as both a consumer or as a state entity as you want. At this point, the question is whether it'll be reflected in the map that gets used to allocate funding. Now each state will have to have its own challenge process. So when the states implement BEAD, they don't necessarily need to use the FCC broadband availability data, and they don't have to exclusively use the FCC broadband availability data. They can also supplement with their own data. So the study you did could be very useful to the state broadband office as they are putting together their initial proposal and their final proposal, and they're awarding grants. And as I mentioned in the presentation, there will be a state challenge process that will be run through the OBI. They could use that data as well. So I think it's very valuable data that you have, and there is an opportunity to use that data outside of the FCC process. It could also be used to help inform the FCC about broadband availability on their own map. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer. Mapping is a complicated subject.
The explanation. I hate to cut off further discussion, but I want to keep us going through the rest of our agenda. So please consider reaching out to Clay directly for other questions. And again, look for some of the slides to take a look at online later today or tomorrow. Thank you so much, Clay, for getting us immersed in all those updates.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me. It was nice meeting all of you, and I'll turn it back over to Henry.
Great. Well, so the next agenda item has to do with mapping. So that was a helpful transition actually as a question, because there's really a couple mapping initiatives going on. There's work being done by the FCC and their broadband data collection program, the bulk challenge process, et cetera. And there's work that the state is sponsoring through the University of New Hampshire. So I'll just briefly introduce David Justice again to help us learn a bit more. And maybe, so DJ, I'll turn it over to you. What I was hoping you could do is tell us a little bit about what you're doing. And then of course, how do we help? How do we participate?
Well, thank you. Hello. I also have some slides that I can run through if that's something you'd like to see.
Yeah, a couple of slides would be helpful.
All righty.
You should be co-host and be able to do that. Let me know if there's an issue. We've just got kind of a one color screen right now.
Oh. Well, that's not working then. Huh. Sorry about this.
No worries. As a fallback, maybe the visual could be the web page or something when it makes sense.
Well, I guess I'm just going to skip the slides then and talk about things in general. I think everybody here has a pretty good idea of why broadband is so important in New Hampshire, and this state has obviously put together the Office of Broadband Initiatives and decided that broadband mapping is important to better understand the landscape of broadband throughout the state. And so they put out an RFP in the spring of 2022 to do broadband mapping. And we were fortunate enough to be selected to do that mapping project. And the funding for that comes through the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. And the initiative formally began in November of 2022 and will proceed through December of 2026. And so, like the FCC, we'll be doing iterative mapping on a twice a year basis with intermediate updates as if additional data becomes available in between those projected publication dates. And the total cost of this mapping is in the neighborhood of $1 million over the 4-year period. The participants who are working on the mapping is NH Granite, which is the GIS clearinghouse for New Hampshire, and will be responsible for mapping the ISP data that is collected. We'll also develop a main project website, data viewer, and various dashboards. We also have a couple of consultants, one of who is Carol Miller, and she will work with ISPs to collect their data and also work with municipalities to help acquire E911 data. In addition, Carol has a vast amount of broadband knowledge after years of working in the industry, and she'll also help as general issues arise. Scott Valcourt will do fiber optic analysis and also provide general consultation as needed. Like Carol, Scott has extensive expertise in the field of broadband throughout the region. He also works in Maine on these kind of things. And the goal of the mapping is to identify areas of served, unserved, underserved internet access, and that'll include technology types and speeds. For the project, the Office of Broadband Initiatives defines broadband as wireline service with connection speeds of 100 megabits per second downstream and 20 megabits per second upstream. We're planning to map the ISP data using address locations on the back end. However, because of some of the data we're using and the legal restrictions associated with it, our public presentation of the data is only going to include aggregated visualizations such as coded road segments. To help validate our mapping, we plan to use speed tests and online surveys. And I already mentioned that we will be collecting data on a biannual cycle. So just to go over some of the mapping components of the project. Obviously, the primary component will be to map each ISP's broadband coverage in the state. And this will provide a means to document areas of the state that are unserved, underserved, and served. Other tasks will include developing a service location fabric, inventorying fiber networks, and developing transmission line data, deployment status, and ownership of those transmission lines. I also should mention that should a ISP that's maybe a smaller ISP need assistance with mapping, we built into the budget time to do screen shares to help with that asset. As I mentioned, the Office Broadband Initiative's eager to use local New Hampshire data to map broadband coverage and wherever that's possible. This is going to be done by creating an address location coverage based on local orthophotography, parcel, and E911 data. However, we realized that local data is not going to cover the entire state, and wherever there's gaps, we plan to use the FCC BSL fabric. Unfortunately, I'm not able to show you this slide, which provides an example of locations up along Lake Francis, for example, which shows many houses that are residential and not in some of the other national based fabrics. And so by using sort of a locally derived fabric, we think we can improve on the mapping. So once the location coverage is ready, it's going to be used as a basis for mapping. Mapping will be completed for each wireline ISP who offers internet service in New Hampshire. We're going to accept, in terms of data, polygons, points, KML, KMZ, and CSV files that would include latitude and longitudes. The ISP data will be processed using various geospatial tools. For example, when data are delivered as polygons, we'll do a spatial selection of the fabric point locations, which are covered by the ISP polygon. And then the ISP attributes would be applied to the selected points. And that will give us a data set of locations and service categories. And that data set will become the basis from which to provide metrics for various units of geography. Unfortunately, again, I had a slide to show what that might look like in a map, but I'll skip over that. And verification is going to also be an important part of the project. So once the mapping is completed, we're going to use speed test data to try to help analyze the results of the mapping. And so to do that, we'll use GeoMap, which is distributed by GeoPartners. And we're hoping to get assistance to provide or spread the word about this speed test opportunity for people. And that will help us collect speed test data. So we expect the results from the speed test to generate some layers known as hot and cold spots. And that will help identify broadband, where broadband is less prevalent or more prevalent in the state. I think I mentioned that we've developed a connectivity survey. So this is developed to be used on a handheld device like a smartphone. And we anticipate that many people have access to mobile technology, regardless of broadband availability at their home location. And using this, we'll be able to, they'll be able to communicate service availability through this means. Another part of the project is to develop an online data viewer or data mapper. It'll be similar to the mapper that we developed for the State Broadband Initiative program, in which Granite was heavily involved between 2010 and 2015. The viewer will display basically road segments because of those legal restrictions of using some of those data sources that I mentioned earlier. And the viewer will also include a display form from which users can query the database about broadband availability at a specific address. And so you'd type in your address, click a button, and it would zoom to that address, and the result would show a report showing service availability by ISP, maximum downstream and upstream speeds, and service categories. In addition to online viewers, we're finding that dashboards or online dashboards provide a desirable and effective way to communicate and summarize data to decision makers and stakeholders. And so an important part of this project, obviously, is to convey that information. And we hope to use dashboards to accomplish this outcome. Right now, we're thinking that showing broadband availability using geographic regions such as the entire state or counties, municipalities, voting districts, or SAUs would be very useful. I just mention SAUs because I remember during the pandemic, when everyone was at home, the Commissioner of Education in New Hampshire sent out an email saying, you know, do we know who has broadband and who doesn't? And so a dashboard that would quickly show that information would have been great if we had had it at that time. So you mentioned assistance, and well, by way of example, as some of you probably know, for NH Granite to use the E911 data in our location fabric, individual municipalities have to request that it be sent to our project for use in the broadband mapping effort. And so town participation in that aspect of things is critical, is a critical part of this data collection effort. Also, by helping to circulate the links that we will provide later, that will go to the mapping website, the speed test, and the survey, local entities would also help improve the responses to these items. As an example of that, the New Hampshire State Library is assisted in spreading information about the speed test and the survey by sending links to local libraries. And since that has happened, we're beginning to see an increase in participation there. So that's pretty much an overview of the mapping. Obviously, I'll send these PowerPoint slides out to Henry so that you can review them, and maybe you'll see how much I strayed. They do have some examples, though, of what things might look like once this mapping's finished. And oh, I forgot to mention that the first version of our mapping is projected for March 31st.
Coming up fast.
Right, yeah.
Thanks, DJ. Well, you know, I'll like you said, I'll make sure to post the slides up to the meeting details. It would be helpful if you could put any links about the project right in the chat for folks who might want to respond right away. I think there's time for one maybe quick question, but unfortunately, I think we need to move on. So does anyone have a question for DJ, for the folks at UNH? Okay. I'll check the chat. Okay. Well, let's continue on then. On the agenda, and I'd like to move on to item 5, which says Department of Business and Economic Affairs update. And I've set aside 10 minutes where Matt could provide any updates from the Office of Broadband Initiative. So thanks, Matt, for taking the time today. I made you a co-host if you have any visuals to share.
I do not have visuals to share.
Okay.
So, but no, I appreciate the time. I appreciate everything you guys have done in the past and continue to do. First thing, I tend to speak quickly, and with my northern Massachusetts accent, I may not be that easy to understand. So please stop me if you don't understand something that I said or I say. Just a little background, capital project funds administered by the U.S. Treasury and their ARPA funds. So the state of New Hampshire was given $122 million for that. All that money is pretty much determined where it's going. So $50 million went to New Hampshire Electric Co-op, and they're currently building out to 23,000 addresses in the state. 40 million is currently in RFP right now. We're in negotiations with a contractor for that 40 million. We hope to be able to be in front of Governor and Council next Wednesday, solidifying that contract. 25 million into BMGI. So the thought process, you probably remember Mark and I explaining once we get this low-lying fruit with the $90 million for the RFPs, then we'll be able to go with BMGI, Broadband Matching Grant Initiative, that's in state law. Then we'll be able to really isolate communities that continue to need it, along with the maps that DJ and his team are putting together. We'll really be able to pinpoint where we need to go with the Broadband Matching Grant Initiative funding. On top of that, you know, is the mapping that we put together, or is being put together. And then we have also, hopefully we'll be at GNC next Wednesday, awarding a contract to a consultant. That consultant will be helping us with capital project funds reporting. They'll be helping us with technical assistance, with community technical assistance. We think that's real important as we roll out BMGI, you know, to be able to help municipalities and different organizations on, you know, what we're doing with BMGI and how to administer it, how to track it, and everything else. So that consultant will hopefully be on board by the end of the month. Then we move over to infrastructure, as Clay was talking about. So the first thing we're doing with infrastructure is we're going to beef up the office. I'll be hiring 2 additional people that will be focusing on BEAD and digital equity. So as of right now, the state has been awarded, and there's a couple of components to this. So the state's been awarded $5 million for planning grant for BEAD. When I say awarded, we don't have access to those funds. There were some technical aspects of the application that were deficient, and Clay and I are working through those to actually get the funds in state, but the funds are allocated to us and we are working to that. Digital equity, we've been awarded $525,000 planning grant for that. Same types of things are wrong with the application. So Clay and I are working to solidify that application so we get the funds actually in state. What we're going to be doing with that is we're going to be hiring 2 consultants, one for BEAD that will write off the state's 5-year plan. At the same time, we'll have another consultant working on the digital equity plan. And digital equity and the BEAD plans have to coexist with each other. So, you know, those consultants will have to work with each other to make sure that we follow the NOFOs of both the digital equity and the BEAD structure. And then we'll be able to formulate our initial plans and final plans. So I think, you know, knowing what you guys have done with the digital literacy, you know, that will definitely be a great jumping off point for our consultants, whoever that may be. You know, they'll be part of the digital equity. NOFO is reaching out to all stakeholders in the state to identify where the gaps are and what's needed in the state so that we can develop a real comprehensive plan to fill in those gaps. So, like I said, I speak very quickly. I'm done unless you guys have any questions.
And Matt, if I could jump in here just to clarify that, you know, we on the federal side, we have what we need. So we're working as fast, I'm working as fast as I can to get what the OBI has submitted processed so we can get you your money as quickly as possible. So we'll keep you all updated on that piece, but we're backed up a little bit. As you can imagine, there's 110 or more digital equity and BEAD grants, all with administrative conditions attached that require processing. So I didn't want the group to be left with the impression that New Hampshire is in any way a special case. This is fairly routine situation. There's not really anything terribly problematic about it. Sorry to interrupt, Matt.
Nope, no worries.
Any questions for Matt? Feel free to just unmute. And
I have a quick question. Matt, Tim Murphy here from Southwest Region Planning. Thanks for that update. You mentioned a consultant being on board as early as the end of the month to provide technical assistance to municipalities, perhaps among other things. whether it's now or maybe in the future, near future, we can get a better sense of the types of technical assistance you're referring to and how municipalities can go about exploring their opportunities on that front.
No, absolutely. So the consultant that will hopefully be on board a week from tomorrow is centered on capital projects. So they will be funded through capital projects. So that's the technical assistance they'll be helping with is capital projects. And again, once the contract is signed, then we can get behind closed doors with them to understand, to put a plan together on how they're going to support the municipalities. And on top of that, so the consultant will be hiring for BEAD to write our plan. They will also be tasked with technical assistance to the communities and contractors for infrastructure funding as well. But two different, since there's two different funding sources, two different consultants.
Great, thanks for that. And as I'm trying to indicate, we will be interested, as we primarily serve municipalities, we'll be interested in trying to understand the details of those opportunities a little bit better and provide somewhat of a megaphone to our membership and making sure that the municipalities are aware of what might be out there for them.
Absolutely. Appreciate your help there. We want to get it out. We need to help the towns, and we appreciate your help getting the word out.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Other questions for Matt? Feel free to just unmute and ask. Matt, I have a quick one while we're waiting for anyone to collect their thoughts. There's these two data collection initiatives going on, and one for me is there a strategy? Do we simply, try to participate fully in both, or is one more important than the other, in your view?
When you're speaking about the difference between the planning grant for the 5-year plan and digital equity?
I'm speaking about the difference between the FCC's broadband data collection and their challenge, process, and then, the UNH's data collection and what they're going to be doing.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, both fronts are very important, obviously. The FCC, the maps are up. So if you Google FCC broadband maps, they are up. You can go in there and put your address down. You may have to toggle through some tools to get to, because right now, the last I saw it, it defaulted to all broadband, which includes satellites. So it makes it look like New Hampshire is 100% covered. But if you click on some toggles to come down to just wired broadband, then you may see a little better of a picture of, it's not an accurate picture by any means, a little better of a picture of who has broadband and who doesn't. And from there, you can put your address in and it'll say if you are served or not served and who serves in the area, much like the old maps will tell you the different technologies that are in the area, but it should tell you if you are served or not. DJ, through his team and them putting together a similar fabric, they were able to, forgive me, I have the number wrong, DJ, of about 600 to 1,000 addresses that did not exist on the FCC fabric. So his team put together a bulk challenge and submitted that. So that, the thought process there was if it's not on their maps and no ISP claimed them, that they should automatically default to not served, but that's not what the FCC is doing. The FCC is sending them back out to the ISPs and confirming that they don't serve them. Sorry, go ahead.
I just said I understand. Thanks.
So, we need, we want to invest $1 million in capital projects funds to support David's initiative with the mapping, because we think the state maps are much more important. Number one, we're doing fiber mapping. So where is the fiber in the state? Where's the middle mile in the state? In order to, hopefully help ISPs that they don't have to invest in the middle mile. They can just maybe lease off of somebody that's already existing in the state. the other thing on top of it is that we're gonna hopefully use David's maps to challenge any SEC maps. You know, first using capital projects and then pivoting over to infrastructure. So both are extremely important. You know, the SEC maps, as Clay said, they had a timeline of January 13th that they guarantee if you had a challenge in by January 13th, they guarantee those challenges would be resolved by the June 30th so they could affect the funding. But both maps are incredibly important.
So we're coming towards the end of time, but I want to encourage folks to look at, for example, the links I noted in the other agenda items for a couple of bills that are proposed this session. I also want to give it a chance, you know, there's no one pounding in our door here at the library for any just general updates that folks would like to share. And Matt, actually, I might actually turn to you for the first update. I know BEA is going to be hosting a meeting in Claremont, I believe next week, where you're going to maybe talk about broadband there. Do you happen to have the details to share with folks?
I can definitely get the details, but I believe we're going to the Claremont Savings Bank Community Center. I think it's the 23rd. And we'll be talking about broadband. We'll be talking about the BEA's housing initiative with Andrew Dorsett. And also Steve Fournier will be talking about Northern Borders. So we're trying to do a roadshow tomorrow. We're gonna be up in Jefferson, I believe. That'll be our first one. So hopefully we'll have some bugs ironed out by the time we get to Claremont.
Great. I'll post the flyer to that with our other meeting materials for this meeting for everyone. How about other just updates from folks? Does anyone want to share a little bit about what they're doing? Feeling a lot of pressure with only a couple minutes left. Okay, well, I apologize for the crunched agenda. We had gone a bit from since our last meeting and probably a bit off more than we could chew for this one. So appreciate everyone's attendance today. Head on over to swrpc.org/broadband to download some of the meeting materials and links we've talked about today. I'll get those posted today or tomorrow. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a good rest of your day.